From Islam's insane 12-win streak, followed by a win over the Great, to Bronx claiming he won't change his fighting style at all, here's why Charles Oliveira will be embarrassed again by Islam Makhachev. Even when Bronx tangled with the Dagestani beast, for the first time, I was confident that Islam would destroy him, and I'm sure he'll do it again, because let's be honest, no one at 155 can even come close to matching his track record, especially not after his most recent win over Alexander Volkanovski. Islam's fought a total of 24 times in his MMA career, and he's won every single fight except for his second bout in the UFC. But since his first and only loss in 2015, he's been on a killing spree for almost 8 years now. He's been undefeated the whole time, racking up 12 wins in a row, until the boss man finally gave him a title shot at UFC 280. And as expected, the Dagestani was not gonna let Oliveira stand between him and his dream. Ever since then, Islam's been rocking the lightweight throne, but an even bigger achievement than winning the lightweight title was his most recent fight against Alex the Great. Because Volk was his toughest challenge to date, which is still obvious considering the Aussie's #1 on pound-for-pound rankings right now, but Islam survived a 5-round war with one of the greatest fighters in UFC history and put the featherweight champ in his place. But despite Islam's track record and insane wrestling skills that did give him a small edge, Oliveira was supposed to give him a tough time at the very least, because he had a lot of potential advantages over the Dagestani. Just take striking, for example. Even though Islam's camp has tried to paint him as an exact copy of Khabib Nurmagomedov, but with the added effect of knockout striking that Khabib never showed himself, it was nowhere near the level of Oliveira's ability to trade punches, because Bronx was a sniper on the feet. The Brazilian is still one of the most versatile strikers in the promotion, known for punishing his opponents with every single strike in the rulebook. And don't think for a moment that he's just flashy, because he's got a lot of mean power to back his strikes up. Take a look at his KO record, and you won't even have to watch his previous fights. Charles was heading into the title fight with 9 KOs on his record, but an even bigger advantage than his KO power was his technique. Oliveira was notorious for attacking down the center line with knees and uppercuts, and that was supposed to be the best solution to Islam's nasty takedown attempts. So it was clear that the Dagestani would need a plan B in case the striking didn't go his way, and luckily for him, he had his wrestling background to back him up, but he wished it was as simple as this. Because even if the fight went to the ground, Oliveira had the looming threat of submissions in his favor. It was a no-way-out situation for the Dagestani, because Oliveira was the most dangerous submission fighter in UFC history, at least as far as the stats were concerned. He was holding the record for most submissions in UFC history, boasting a total of 16 subs over UFC hotshots like Justin Gaethje and even Dustin Poirier. And it wasn't surprising considering his Brazilian jiu-jitsu background, which made him fall in love with guillotines and arm bars, to the point that Bronx had an attempt rate of a whopping 2.9 submissions per 15 minutes. On the other hand, Makhachev was somewhat of a subspecialist himself, but neither his record nor his submission rate even came close to Oliveira's. So it looked like all the cards were in Charles's favor. That's exactly why it was so shocking to see Islam score an easy second-round win over him. That's right, and he ended the fight in the most ironic way possible. A knockdown followed by a deadly triangle choke. And with a setup like that, I'm not even gonna blame Oliveira for tapping out in an instant. But that wasn't the only time Islam beat Bronx at his own game, because the whole fight was more or less the same. The first round in particular was classic Makhachev showing off his wrestling skills, seeing how he had ground control for most of the round, and even ended the first while being on top of Oliveira. The second round was far more interesting though, especially since we got to see a completely different side of Makhachev. The Dagestani proved to be an even deadlier striker than grappler, as he kicked things off with a straight left and shocked everyone down the round when rocked Oliveira with a powerful punch combo, followed by a high kick that slowed the champ down. That definitely surprised him, since it's not common for him to get a taste of his own medicine, and out of a mix of panic and frustration, Bronx made the huge mistake of throwing careless punches leaving himself open to a skull-crushing overhand hook from the Dagestani that immediately knocked the champ down. And you bet Islam didn't waste a second to take advantage of this golden chance, because he quickly went for an arm triangle choke, and even though Charles tried to find a way out, he had no option but to tap out to the new, undisputed lightweight champ. But you can't hand all the credit to Islam here, because from the looks of it, Oliveira played a huge role in letting the Dagestani whoop his ass, and his biggest mistake was to underestimate Islam's striking. Do Bronx thought of him as an ordinary fighter, no different than the last 10 guys he'd defeated in a row. That's exactly why he applied his trademark aggressive style, constantly pressuring Makhachev to move backward and defend itself. But the same style that helped him score a record. 20 finishes ended up costing him this fight, and according to lightweight legend Beneil Dariush, he didn't exactly do a great job with distance management. And it makes no sense, especially when you look at Oliveira's natural physical advantage, because he's got a God-given massive reach of 74 inches, which puts him at a significant range advantage over a lot of other lightweights. So, just like the rest of us, Benny thought he'd use his reach to keep the distance and hit without getting hit. But Charles literally threw caution to the wind, and he was so focused on pushing forward that he left a lot of openings. Even in takedowns, he was so focused on scoring it that he got reversed instead. In a way, you can't exactly think of Makhachev's submission as beating Do Bronx at his own game. Because remember, he was knocked down, which made him a far easier target for submission, so his real blunder was getting floored in the first place. Looking at it this way, you could say Charles stands a small chance of avoiding humiliation in their rematch, and luckily for him, Henry Cejudo's got his keys to victory. Triple C thinks Oliveira needs to be a better competitor than fighter, and to put it simply, he needs to adjust his fighting style according to every new opponent. In the case of Makhachev, a guy who's got a great defense and isn't afraid to fight anyone in the pocket, Do Bronx needs to master the distance and lose the pressure. And of course, keeping the fight on the feet is just as important, because Charles claimed he could fight Islam while being on his back before their first encounter, and we all saw how that turned out for him. So the ground game's a big no for him unless he sees a real shot at a submission. Last but not least, he's got to stay away from the clinch, because Islam's sambo takes the lead on his jiu-jitsu any day, and he can't risk being so close to a guy who knows how to play with the legs. Now, I'm not saying he'd win the rematch if he does this, but he could make it past the second round at least. Though I'm more than confident he's getting floored in the first round this time, because Charles has refused to change anything in his fighting style. When he was asked what he'd do differently in the case of a rematch, he simply said he'll be good old Charles because, apparently, he needs nothing else to reclaim his throne. Do Bronx claimed his only mistake at UFC 280 was not being in his head that night, and while we only saw 10% of him back then, we'd see him in all his glory this time. In fact, he's so overconfident that he's not even going to look to their old fight and build on his mistakes, because, according to him, he's got nothing to learn since he's already perfect. Well, all I'm going to say is, Charles just booked a first round or maybe even first minute KO from the Dagestani. So, from Do Bronx claiming he won't change his fighting style at all, to Islam's insane 12-win streak, followed by a win over the Great. That's why Charles Oliveira will be embarrassed again by Islam Makhachev,